DNR as a biologist. I am from Western Maryland. I'm a native, third generation from Cumberland. Worked a lot of the first part of my career on the public wildlife management units in state forest in Western Maryland, but then worked throughout the state. And actually, in the final 5 years of my career, I was a game program manager. And so I know most of all the players within DNR, and I've always had a passion for habitat management. Retired about 2000. It was a few years after that that Bill Harvey came to me and said, hey, the Wildlife Management Institute is looking for a contractor to work part-time to promote the implementation of the National Woodcock Conservation Plan in Western Maryland. And it was a perfect fit to me. It wasn't that many weeks of work a year. So I began working for the WMI, Wildlife Management Institute. It's a nonprofit wildlife conservation organization. It's been around since about 1911, I think, something like that. That's a small group of staff, but very effective, well managed. And they were given the job to facilitate the implementation of the National Woodcock Conservation Plan. The plan was collaborated on by the Fish and Wildlife Service, many state wildlife agencies, a lot of partners, but it was a mammoth job to take the best biological science, if you would, to address the declining woodcock population, and because of being a migratory species, to then effect an effective plan on how to implement that across the whole landscape of the Mid-Atlantic. So I started out on woodcock. We worked on woodcock for about 5 or 6 years specifically. One of the early products of that effort was the production of the document, the first of its kind, identifying what are the best management practices for woodcock. And I had a bunch of them back there. I think if there's not any left, make sure you see me before you leave. But this is the recipe, if you will, if you're really interested in managing specifically for woodcock, what you do on the landscape. And all this material that I'll make reference to in my presentation is available on site. Take a second, write this website down, www.youngforest.org. And there's this, in the last 10 years, there's been a wealth of publications and resource materials and videos, etc., on this whole concept of managing for young forest wildlife. Okay. After about 5 years, it became, as we started to work on implementation of the Woodcock Plan, one of my first charges in Western Maryland was to identify in each county, Garrett and Allegheny County, a demonstration area, a place where people like yourself, landowners, resource managers, people interested in improving habitat for woodcock, we wanted them to be able to, habitat management takes time, okay? The work that you saw starting at McKee is going to take, 5 to 10 years before we're going to see the results of that. So these demonstration areas are places where you can come and visualize 15, 20, 30 years of habitat work and actually see when someone tells you what to do, what the outcomes might be. So the Wildlife Management Institute has had a great working relationship with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. A lot of those resource managers are in the room today. You're going to hear from some of the guys from the state forest. But we have one wildlife manager in Garrett County. Who's ever been to Mount Nebo? Okay, so over half the people here, wouldn't surprise me, because Mount Nebo is probably the most well-known piece of public land in Maryland for grouse hunting. It always has been. It's in that part of the state on the Appalachian Plateau where we've got decent grouse numbers. It's actively managed. It was one of the locations where the state did their grouse research project a few years back. A very popular area. The other area that we identified is Kirk Orchard, which is in Allegheny County. And Mark Beals, where's Mark at? You're back here. All right. Mark's going to speak to us later today, and I'm not going to give you a lot of detail about that. But we're very fortunate right now. Both Mark Beals and John Denning are in the room. They are the managers of the 2 largest, I believe I'm accurate, state forest land holdings in Western Maryland, for sure, and maybe the state. We haven't even the Chesapeake Forest now. But now, these guys, not only are they good foresters, but they're very passionate about wildlife habitat improvement, which is a wonderful mix, and we're starting to see the results of that effort. All right, with that background, I want to start into now, okay, it was the Woodcock Initiative. We've now changed it to expand it to the Appalachian Mountains Young Forest Initiative. Okay, many state and federal agencies, as I mentioned, have come together and recognized the need for young forest on the landscape. And you've already heard from some of the speakers or some of the reasons for that, all right? The region, back up a minute, Jonathan, I'm sorry. Okay. The region that I work in is called Bird Conservation Region 28. It's a 5-state area, and within that 5-state region, each of the state's wildlife action plans identifies what we call species of greatest conservation need. These are wildlife species that have one level of threat or another. But in all these areas, there's 87 species that require shrubland habitats or young forest habitat. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has named the American woodcock as a national focus species. And one of my graphics in the middle will show you for the last 40 years, the national population of woodcock has declined on a rate of about 2% a year. Now, just in the last 2 years, and we'd like to take some credit to that from the work that's being done nationally, in some parts of the country, that trend is flattened and actually starting to go up slightly. So that's a great thing that's happening. Okay, Jonathan. Okay, let's talk a little bit, and this, years go by quickly. This data is getting to be a little bit dated, but the message is still the same. If we look at this 5-state region, the blue bar graph is the percentage of the forest that is in seedling sapling age class. The next color is the pole size, the sort of brown, and the yellow high bars is the saw timber size. So in all 5 of these states, okay, you can see that most of the landscape is in saw timber size forest. And as a generalization in this part of the country, back in the late 1800s, before we had conservation laws and regulations, before we had regulated timber harvesting, the mountains were denuded. Devastated. They were clear-cut from edge to edge. What we are seeing now, 100 years later, is a regrowth of that forest. Now, there's some exceptions to that. There's some places where, up in Garrick or Tucker County, there's Cathedral, what's it called, National Forest, Jim? Cathedral State Park, I believe, where there was a part. You can still go up there and see poplar trees 6 foot along that are virgin, but for point of conversation, most of the whole Mid-Atlantic region is second growth forest. This is what you see when you ride around. Very little of it is in this early young age forest, which is home to 60 to 80 species of wildlife that we all love and enjoy. Okay. Let's talk about what have been the trends now in that. Okay. This one here? Okay. What have been the trends? Okay. If we look at the time period from 75 to 2005, about a 30-year time period, in Maryland, we've actually enjoyed a little bit of an increase or a spike in the percentage of the forest as seedling saplings. That can be attributed to the state forest management programs. Greenridge State Forest, for point of conversation, ever since I know for the last 20 or 30 years, has been harvesting, Mark, about 100 to 200 acres a year, roughly, on a 1%. Basically, for point of conversation, Mark will get into more detail. About a 1% of the forest is harvested every year, as is Savage River State Forest, Potomac area. They have a very active forest management program, which has really helped out the trends in Maryland on the percentage of the landscape in young forest. In Ohio, just the opposite. They've lost tremendous young forest, as is Pennsylvania. Virginia is slightly higher, but in general, the trend has been pretty poor. And again, this data is a little old, from 2003 now, but saw timber stands occupy about 66% of the forest landscape, pole timber about 21%, seedling saplings about 10% or less. Why is this occurring? Okay, well, there's a lot of factors. Most of these natural dynamics and these things.
If you want to get up there, don't block for you. I'll do it for you if you want.
Okay, all right. There's a lot of factors that go into play while this is going on. For instance, beaver, a natural phenomenon. Beaver go into a watershed and they eat themselves out of house and home after a while. They go in, they eat everything up, and after they leave, they're the great wildlife habitat engineer, okay? Probably you guys have hunted woodcock and grouse in places where beaver flowages were. The dams come up, they kill everything. Young alders and dogwoods and such come in. We have natural fires that used to be a much more common thing on the landscape. We did too good of a job now with fire suppression. So where those fires used to come in, used to create a lot of young forests. We don't have as much of that anymore. We have problems with general forest maturation. Up in New England for years, until the last 20, all those small farms that we used to have were excellent places to hunt grouse. Now it's all grown up into a pole-sized forest. So a lot of things are going on. Invasive species have not been a friend to young forests because they're competing, they're very aggressive plants, and they compete with the native species that come on. So for a lot of different reasons, we've had some real negative impacts resulting in decline of young forest. Okay, we had some, Bob and Bill were talking about woodcock. This is a nice graphic that shows us what's happened to woodcock abundance in the country. In the 1970s, and this data is all from Singing Ground survey information. And Bill mentioned that back in the 70s there were places in Maryland where we had singing woodcock that now we have nothing but development, highways, and malls, okay? Same things that happened in a lot of places throughout the range of the woodcock. The darker the red color, the higher density of woodcock, okay? But down into here in Maryland, this is western Maryland here in the 70s, we still had some pretty decent woodcock populations. In the 2000s, everything south of this line has very minimum resident singing male woodcock, okay? Good. This is the general decline in woodcock numbers since the late 60s, about 2% a year. That's the natural long-term index, but again, just in the past 2 years, this line is now starting to level out in some areas, which is very encouraging. Earlier, right before the break, someone over here asked a question about how much habitat would it take, okay? All right, we're going to show you now in two graphics here the change in the male woodcock from singing ground data in those 30-year periods in that portion of Maryland, which is western Maryland. In 1970, through a formula, they determined that approximately 2,500 singing male woodcock existed in 1970. In 2005, it was down to just over 1,000, or about a 56% reduction in the number of singing male woodcock just in Ohio, in Maryland. And across the 5-state region, it's about the same, on average of about, so it's been a very significant decline based upon data from the singing ground surveys in the woodcock population. Okay? How do we put the brakes on? In other words, how much habitat work would we have to do to change that trend and get that woodcock population going back up? Well, they did some extrapolation, and they figured out in Maryland it would take about 30,000 acres, to answer your question, all right, about 3,000 acres a year for a 10-year period, all right, to produce the amount of young forest habitat to get that woodcock population back to where it was 30 or 40 years ago. That's a very significant number. It's not obtainable, okay, under the present programs that we have, under the interest of the public and for a lot of reasons. But it gives you a good sense of what the scale of this program is. Okay, the Western Maryland Woodcock plan is pretty simple: to halt the decline in the numbers and to improve hunting and viewing opportunities. Most of the people in this room are very avid bird hunters, grouse and woodcock hunters, I would think. You know, there's just as many people, if not more, that enjoy woodcock from a non-game species perspective. The dance of the woodcock is something that in the spring of the year, many state parks, many naturalists, it's a very entertaining thing. So we don't want to discount in this business of wildlife management, the more partners, the more people that enjoy a resource, in a political perspective, the more power you have, as Bill said, to get the job done. So we want to have not only hunters but non-hunters aware of the problem and doing what each of us can do. The objectives is to achieve a positive population growth of 1,400 males by 2018. Probably not going to happen, but that's what we'd like to try to get to, and to create a lot of additional acres of young forest habitat. Okay, this graphic now is 6 or 8 years old, but the purpose in Maryland was to develop and refine best management practices for woodcock through an adaptive process based on what all that says is that we were going to try to apply the best science to the land, all right, create these demonstration areas, improve them as best as we knew how, and at the same time monitor the changes in the population through annual singing ground surveys. And every year since Mark and I have been doing this work up at Kirk Orchard, we run a singing ground survey. It's been very rewarding to see the number of birds, and that area is not a particularly wet area. I'm really surprised actually at how many singing woodcock we have there every spring. But it's been very good, and on our route, which is 1 mile long with 7 stops, we generally see about 7, 8, 9 woodcock. For a dry area, it's a pretty decent response. Yep. So we're testing these practices. We developed these 2 demonstration areas, as I made reference to. We're monitoring how the woodcock are responding to this habitat. We're doing a lot of public outreach, like these kind of programs. I do these presentations all the time. I work with Jonathan here from the University of Maryland in their annual Woodlands Stewards Workshop for private landowners. We did webinars, and I just asked him at the break. We've had over 200 visitors to our webinar. So there's been a lot of efforts collectively throughout the country, all right, to increase the awareness of everybody involved that has an interest in this, of what the plight is and why we need to increase young forest. Linda Ordaway, who spoke earlier today, here she is right here. Linda and I met last year with the Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources, and herself, and the other gentleman was from the Appalachian Mountain Joint Venture. We had a full afternoon meeting with the Secretary of DNR and all the high-level directors of the Park Service, the Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, and they got a presentation similar to what I'm giving to you now. We had great discussion, and you just keep pounding on the door, and sooner or later people start to get the idea. And we've been feeling pretty good about what we've seen the Maryland DNR do in the last 5 years, and Bill alluded to it, the WMA planning process. So it's pretty optimistic, some of the things that we've been seeing. Okay. This book's in the back. I mentioned to you earlier, please get a copy. All right. What are the best management practices for woodcock? All right. We'd like to have a relatively large acre of land. Not that if you're a small landowner, you can't do things on your property to improve for wildlife, and for woodcock you can. But if we had a 300 to 500 acre management area, that would be the optimum. Feeding areas for woodcock are moist soil areas because woodcock primarily feed on earthworms. So we have to have a wet areas. That's why Kirk Orchard is sort of surprising how many birds we see there. We also need dense regenerating forest, okay, on the scale of 4,000 to 8,000 stems per acre. Woodcock are a species that the species of tree isn't as important as the density of the vegetation. Okay, again, they're feeding on earthworms. They're not feeding on fruit from any shrub or tree. All right, they want dense vegetation because that protects them from their aerial predators. So that density is very important. They need nesting and brood cover near young hardwood stands for singing grounds in their courtship, and we want about 1/4 to half acre size singing grounds, and per 100 acres about 4 of those. So about 4 singing grounds per 100 acres. Singing grounds can be old logging roads, log landings, the edges of odd fields, somewhere where you have an open habitat relatively close to that thick diurnal habitat where in the evening they don't have to travel far. The roosting areas are larger areas over 3 acres in size that are valuable in the summer months for the young for roosting. Okay. Potential partners in Maryland, and good partners they've been, is the Maryland DNR and the Ruffed Grouse Society. The The Nature Conservancy has land holdings we work on. We know how to do this work now, and everybody in this room is already on board. The challenge that I give you is to reach out to those people that own the land, whether it's public, private, county, whatever it is. We all in our life, our network of life, have opportunities to influence landowners, whatever they may be, to possibly do the kind of work that we now know how to do. So that's the challenge. Just to throw this one in here, sometimes in this business we get chastised, my word, for focusing on a single species. They'll say, well, why are you just doing it for the woodcock or just for the grouse? Well, in this case, we're not. Those are the high-profile species. You as grouse hunters, that's your bread and butter. But when we're doing this work up in Maine, at the Moosehorn National Wildlife Refuge, during that period of time when they were improving woodcock management work for woodcock, they monitored the response of all these other birds, okay? And over that period from 76 to 2000, about a 25-year period, during that period of time, all these other species of birds also increased in population. So it's the habitat type that provides the basic needs of food, water, and structure and what that critter needs, and it's obvious that more than just woodcock and grouse need it. There's a lot of other species. And this is just a graphic that we use in one of the publications that WMI put out of a lot of the other species that are right on board. Two of the more high-profile species are the Goldenwinged Warbler, and I have some information back there. The Goldenwinged Warbler is a species in Maryland that exists only in western Maryland at elevations above 900 feet. Okay, it's got a lot of problems. I won't get into them all right now. It's on the website if you want to learn about it. But the Natural Resource Conservation Service now has a very active cost share program implemented in Allegheny and Garrett County and throughout the Northeast, where they will actually pay landowners to do habitat work to improve conditions for Goldenwinged Warbler. Well, when they're doing that, they're also helping the ruffed grouse. Okay, so it's a good program. Way up in the Northeast, one more, Jonathan. Go back there once. Another critter is not the Appalachian Cottontail, but the New England Cottontail up in the Northeast. A lot of work being done, and again, a lot of cost share monies. The woodcock, the New England Cottontail, and the Goldenwinged Warbler are really the three keystone species that are leading the effort on the Young Forest Initiative. Okay, these state wildlife action plans then identify species of greatest conservation need. They outline the steps on how to address those problems. And these plans in aggregate, or if you take all the states together, develop in aggregate are a national action agenda to prevent wildlife from becoming endangered. I know this is a long website, but if you go home on Google and just punch in Maryland Wildlife Action Plan, it's a very informative website that gives you everything that's going on in Maryland with their state wildlife action plan. Jonathan? All right, this is a little graphic that just shows you when we start to implement young forest, if we cut the forest back and do a hardwood regeneration, each year as we go down that succession of growth, different species of wildlife benefit. Early on, it's the olive-sided flycatcher, then these other warblers and vireos, and anyhow, but usually young forest habitat has some validity and value for 15 years, maybe up to 20 years. Bill mentioned that earlier, that after about 20 years, you've got to start over. So it's something that's always changing. Whereas a species like a bird that lives in mature forests, once the mature forest is mature, it maintains it for a long time. Young forest habitat's not that way. John? Okay, Maryland's action plan has identified this young forest habitat as a key wildlife habitat. John? And this here is just telling you that there are some consequences over the debate of forest management methods, and we keep hearing from down in Virginia, and I know, Linda, you've been working with the folks on the Jefferson on these national forest plans. There's a lot of controversy about cutting, so that's not helping us. Remember I talked about the 300 to 500 acre optimum management unit, if you will, for woodcock. What we're showing here in one photograph, and this, if you were up at Kirk Orchard in Green Ridge State Forest, a lot of that area looks like this now. The state has did a great job the last 10 years. That area now is, in, I don't want to take Mark's talk, but it's a 500-acre area of state land specifically managed for young forest. It's the largest unit of state land in the state of Maryland focusing on young forest habitat. Looks very much like this. From a woodcock's perspective, these are the roosting areas. This is the thick diurnal place where they're getting the fishing worms. And I think there's another one then, Jonathan, the next one. Okay, there's also singing grounds in there, but back up one. There was some discussion earlier. Some of the guys here have been up to Warrior Mountain Wildlife Management Area, and I used to manage that area a long time ago. This forest stand here was originally a 40-year-old stand of Virginia pine. Virginia pine in western Maryland is one of the first tree species to come in after the farmer leaves the land. Okay, it's a young, like black locust, and Virginia pine up there come in first, and once it gets up, you can't thin it. All right, you either clear cut or let it blow down. We cut it down, and this was, we didn't know what was going to come in, but this was a stand of muscle wood that came in very dense, and for Allegheny County, that's about as good a grouse and woodcock cover there that you're going to get. So that was a good thing. This is a singing ground for woodcock. Go ahead. This is a stand of another valuable grouse and woodcock shrub that we have up there, which is hawthorn. It's a little more common in Garrett County than Allegheny, but great place to find migratory woodcock in October and November. This is just a typical Garrett County picture. Allegheny County has about 600 acres of wetlands. Garrett County has 6,000 acres of wetlands because it's up on the Appalachian Plateau. And this is a very typical wet forested swamp or wetland in Garrett County, surrounded with a nice feathered edge, and that's good woodcock habitat. And I just throw this in here. Some of the people I talk to have never seen a woodcock, and right there is a hen on a nest. Very camouflaged, hard to see. Woodcock actually nest in a little more open habitat than they feed in. A lot of times you'll find them just upslope in a little opener area, maybe in pole-sized timber as opposed to really sapling size. Okay, go ahead. That's just a close-up. And back up there 1 minute. This is just, a lot of people in the room I'm sure know this, but some might not. One of the most amazing things to me about a woodcock is its beak. Okay, they feed on earthworms. Well, try to take a pair of needle-nose pliers and go down in the earth and open them up. You can't, okay? Only the very tip of the woodcock right there has a hinge on it, that last quarter inch. So they can probe down, open up just that tip, grab that earthworm, and pull them up. Pretty cool. I don't know who engineered that, but they knew what they were doing. Okay. Okay. A few slides now about the Mount Ebell Wildlife Management Area. Many partners have come together there. Bill alluded to how much work's been done there in the last 10 years. One of the things that's happened up there, let's go to the next slide, which is a better photograph. Anyone in the room? Probably not. Ever know Al Geis? Oh, great. Okay. Al Geis was a very enthusiastic woodcock and grouse hunter. He lived right down here at Columbia, Maryland. He was a biologist for the Fish and Wildlife Service, and him and I had many interesting talks in my office, always not complimentary to DNR. Be as it may, Al was a great guy. He had tremendous passion for woodcock and grouse hunting. And when he died, he left in his estate $25,000 earmarked to be used in Maryland to improve grouse and woodcock habitat. So, a couple years ago, his son's name is Dean. The family worked with DNR and the Wildlife Management Institute and Ruffed Grouse Society, and we put together, in his name, we named this work that's being done at the demonstration area now the Al Geis Memorial Woodcock Habitat Demonstration Area, and you guys can read that. But real nice sign, and we did a lot of great work now, and I'm going to try to highlight for you. Go ahead. Okay, one of the first, Mount Nebo's been managed for grouse for 30 years in varying levels. We go through a period of politics when it was very active, and then we went a slow time. But for point of conversation, there's been work done for grouse at Mount Nebo for a long time. Okay, so I don't mean to take all the credit that just in the last 5 years, but we have been able to jumpstart it because of the infusion of some funding money and some energy and some awareness of this national woodcock or national young forest initiative. I guess it's been about 3 winters ago now. The objective on this project was to go into the perimeter of the wetland on Mount Nebo, and for those fellows that have hunted there, you know where I'm talking about. I think it's called Miller's Run. Jim, you can help me on the names here. I think Miller's Run. Okay, Miller's Run is a wetland that comes down through, and it's a very large, expansive, forested wetland swamp in the heart of the Mount Nebo Wildlife Management Area. Okay, what we wanted to do for the first time in Maryland, woodcock are very much benefited by alder. Okay, the problem with the alder on this management area, it was decades old. It was ancient. And I have a photograph here in a minute. When alder gets really old, instead of having nice vertical stems and lots of it, it gets thick 2 to 3 inch stems and it falls over horizontally. Okay, although still value to woodcock, not near as valuable. So we wanted to go in on the perimeter of the swamp. Take the next one, Jonathan. On the perimeter of the swamp, and we identified 8 cuts. And I got some better photographs in a minute. But these 8 cuts were on average about 1 acre in size, and they ran upslope from the wetland up into the dry land. So we took a gradient from the very wettest part of the swamp and cut a swath about 150 feet wide upslope to be about 1 acre strip. The reason we did that, because somewhere in that gradient is where all those earthworms are going to be happy. Okay, if we just would have did right around the perimeter, we might not necessarily got the right spot. Okay, it's a very delicate area to work. It's a wetland, okay? So we had to get a timber operator who was willing to work in the very coldest part of the winter because we wanted the ground to be frozen. And we got the 2 master loggers who are no longer in business, took on this job on, and they worked many mornings at 10 degrees, okay? When they were done in the springtime, you could not tell there was a skidder on the property. It was absolutely like the wood disappeared without any mechanical impact at all. They really did a great job. Okay. Okay. Most of the work was harvested by what we call a feller buncher. They went in and they grab it, and I think the next slide shows you it's a pincher mechanism. They pinch the tree off, lay it back. But some of the alder, which is not a commercial value at all, but was part of their contract. Now, in this case, most forest product operators make money. Okay, when they cut a piece of timber off, they want to get paid. Okay, we reversed this one because we knew that we weren't going to get anybody to take this without paying them. So the WMI and RGS put some money into it. They got some money from normal harvesting because a lot of the alder, they took a brush cutter like a weed whacker with a big metal saw blade, and they actually went in there and manually cut that alder down. There's no other way to do it, and it worked out well. It was just time consuming. Okay, go ahead. Okay, this is a picture. Whoops, back up one. This is a picture post harvest. Okay, Miller's Run is down in here. This is the impoundment. This is about 75 feet plus or minus. Okay. Some of this had standing residual scattered pole trees, but most of all this was alder, particularly in this area. Go ahead. This is a picture of old decadent alder, which we were trying to cut down and get rid of. Go ahead. This is a great aerial photograph now showing in the spring, this was cut in the winter, in the spring, these are the areas that were cut. This is Miller's Swamp, okay? We come right down almost close to the water, and we cut 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 2 up here, and 1 down here somewhere. But those are the areas. The plan here is to now watch the regeneration in these areas, and at some point we're going to now go back in and cut these strips out, probably in another 3 or 4 years. Okay, go ahead. One thing that happened up there, which was not expected, we had one small area of aspen. There is some native aspen up there, and the interesting thing about aspen is these trees are not single rooted. Some of you may know this, all right? Aspen is all connected under the ground by one root system. In fact, out west, I learned last winter, there's this, Mark, you forestry guys probably know where this is, there's a 5,000-acre tract of aspen that's all one tree. It's all connected by one root system. But anyhow, this is great grouse stuff, okay? Grouse in Maryland, we are at the southern range of grouse. Okay, grouse are a northern species. Okay, they do very well in deep snow and cold conditions. And what they do up there, the buds of aspen is one of their primary food sources. So when the snow gets deep, they just fly up on the tree and get something to eat. Woodcock can't do that. They got to leave Dodge and head to where it's warm and cozy for the winter. But this is one thing that happened on that cut that we really enjoyed seeing the response to. Go ahead, Jonathan. Go ahead. This is just a graphic. Okay. This is in one growing season. This was an alder that was cut off in January. And of July, 7 months later, this is how much growth we got. So really encouraged to see that. And it's going to be cool to see in 5 years exactly what we end up with. Go ahead. And this is that same photograph I showed you a minute ago in the wintertime. This is one growing season. Okay, and I wish I had a more recent photograph, but it's showing you what's going on. Go ahead. And this is Rick Ladshaw. Rick's the area manager, another great ally for us. He's the manager for the Forest Park and Wildlife Service at Mount Nebo. He's really into this habitat work, and